Hello, my name is LeBlue, Brewmaster of Monk Meditation, and I'm going to try to clarify a few things with the spec that have changed from Warlords of Draenor to Legion in this video. First, there is the caveat that this video is not, I repeat, not directed at higher level mythic dungeons, PvP, or raiding beyond normal and perhaps heroic raids. In addition, I will not be going over stat weights, as this is something that you want, if you really want to optimize, you'll most likely need to do some simcraft work, although I will make a mention of haste later on. This is not a feedback or opinion piece to point out problems or issues with the spec, but the intent is for players who are continuing with Brewmasters in Legion and to give you an idea of what exactly is changing with the spec and how you may need to adjust your playstyle and be prepared for what's coming. The Legion Brewmaster shares similarities with its Warlord's incarnation defensively in that it has the ability that slows the descent of your health bar, albeit it's no longer full on pause like the current implementation of Guard, and an artifact trait that acts similarly to Desperate Measures by spawning Gift of the Ox orbs more rapidly when you drop below 35% health. Offensively, Brewmaster has changed quite a bit more drastically. Spec no longer has a high action per minute requirement as it does on Live, where you need to fill every global cooldown with an ability. In Legion, you'll find that there's a lot of built-in downtime that you can further customize with talents to minimize the amount of downtime that you have. First off, though, we'll be starting with our offensive generator abilities. With the offensive toolkit getting a larger shakeup than defensive, I'm going to start with how your offensive abilities have changed. Note that I will be leaving out talents because that's where you begin customizing your characters, and I'll be covering that later. First off, I'll compare what you have offensively in Warlords to what you have in Legion. In Warlords, you have Jab, Tiger Palm, Blackout Kick, Keg Smash, Breath of Fire, Touch of Death, and Spinning Crane Kick. Legion, you'll have Tiger Palm, Blackout Strike, Keg Smash, and Breath of Fire. You'll notice right off that we no longer have Spinning Crane Kick, Touch of Death, Jab, and Blackout Kick gets a rename. In Legion, Tiger Palm now takes the place of Jab, but now at 25 energy per cast rather than 40. Blackout Strike acts as our filler, but isn't a complete replacement for Tiger Palm. It has a built-in 3-second cooldown. Breath of Fire is a 15-second cooldown with no resource cost. And Keg Smash has gained a range of 10 yards, and the range will extend even further as you develop your artifact. One final thing is that Brewmasters no longer have Chi. Tiger Palm and Keg Smash now reduce the cooldown of your brews, which is what you're putting your resources towards. The energy gameplay remains largely the same in Legion. You're going to use Tiger Palm to bleed off energy so you don't cap while maintaining around 40 energy so that you can use Keg Smash on cooldown. These two abilities no longer grant Chi, but instead reduce the time remaining on your next charge of brew to become available. Blackout Strike and Breath of Fire are used to help fill in globals that you aren't using on Keg Smash, trying to use energy through Tiger Palm. Even with the reduced costs of Tiger Palm relative to Jab, baseline you will have periods of downtime and rotation, but luckily this can be customized through talents if you prefer to have more abilities to use. Just keep in mind that you are now spreading key presses amongst more abilities more frequently than in Warlords. To summarize, you still want to make sure you have 40 energy for Keg Smash. A combination of Tiger Palm and Blackout Strike are what you'll spend most of your globals on as fillers. You're going to use Tiger Palm far more frequently though than you use Jab. Breath of Fire should be used on cooldown as there's no downside to casting it, and even gains significant defensive advantages with the artifact trait Hot Blooded. The defensive kit wasn't shaken up as much. There is a good bit of reskinning that has gone on with it, however. In Warlords, you have Guard, Purify, Expel Harm, Elusive Brew, Baseline Stagger, Shuffle, Gift of the Ox, Zen Meditation, and finally Fortifying Brew. In Legion, a few of these things were trimmed away or substituted for other abilities. In Legion, you'll have Stagger, Purifying Brew, Iron Skin Brew, Expel Harm, Gift of the Ox, Zen Meditation, and Fortifying Brew. A couple things you'll notice is that Elusive Brew is gone, and we no longer generate Shuffle. Guard is gone, but you can think of it as being reworked into Iron Skin Brew. Iron Skin Brew and Purifying Brew still share the same resource like Guard and Purify, but you won't be able to purify nearly as freely. And something that isn't quite explicit is that Gift of the Ox has a much greater role in our self-healing. Iron Skin Brew and Purifying Brew are core to your mitigation and are for not only active mitigation checks, which Iron Skin Brew is the ability you use for these checks, but for general survival during periods of heavy damage. In Warlords, we currently use Guard to pause our health to allow our own self-healing and healers to catch up with the rate of incoming damage as well as to defend against heavy hits. Iron Skin Brew works much in the same way in that it greatly slows the rate of upfront damage intake, but doesn't actually eliminate it. Another way to think about it is that Iron Skin Brew is now a short duration shuffle, but it adds 40% for 6 seconds. To note, You will not be able to keep 100% uptime without taking a lot of extra damage, and you'll want to restrict it to mostly slowing health decline or boss abilities. There's also the balancing act of when to use Purifying Brew as well, which now clears 50% of all stagger rather than 100% of your stagger. Keep in mind that your stagger was greatly increased from what it used to be, and it's actually closer to Blackrock Foundry levels than it is now. When you initially use it, it will be a bit jarring, though, that it doesn't clear all of your stagger, so just kind of get yourself ready for that. Getting back to the actual usage of Purifying Brew, this can be simply stated as wanting to use it after a period of Ironskin Brew when you're expecting to have consistent damage intake. As a player, you also have to judge if high damage is still incoming, can your healer handle the incoming damage without purifying, and are you sitting at low or high health? Keep in mind that being topped off isn't necessarily a bad thing, though. In fact, if you take Gift of the Mist, you want to err on the side of your health being lower, while at the same time not being in panic range for the healers. 40 to 60% has been tossed around, but if you're topped off, don't freak out about it. As previously mentioned, Gift of the Ox is a far more important part of our toolkit as our primary healing tool. Gift of the Ox no longer spawns through auto attacks and now spawned based on damage taken. The easiest way to explain how it works is that you're filling a bar similar to your health pool whenever you take damage. You fill this bar with whatever damage you would have taken after damage reductions, kind of like armor, but before stagger and absorbs, keeping in mind that you do not double dip stagger damage, meaning that your stagger tips do not count towards this bar. Gift of the Mist puts a multiplier on this, increasing the rate at which you generate orbs based on how high your health is after the hit. The lower your end hit point before stagger, the more value towards your orbs. Think of this more like Warlords on Seeing Eye, where it based the damage reduction onto what it would have taken you to, rather than what it actually takes you to. Obviously, you don't want to sit low and freak your healers out too much, but there is value at the talent of slowing your health descent at lower levels of health where it's safe, rather than burning Ironskin Brews at higher levels of health. Next up, I'll go into talents and artifacts, and I will very briefly touch on these. I am not going to be making a guide of what to take. Level 15 is formerly our 30 tier. Zen Sphere has been replaced with a passive, Eye of a Tiger, which applies a dot to enemies you hit with Tiger Palms, and that dot also heals you. This is a talent row that allows you to add another ability to rotation or stick with a passive in the Eye of the Tiger, as Chi Burst and Chi Wave have remained. Level 30 is formerly our 15 tier. Chi Torpedo is Momentum, with the current Chi Torpedo animation, and it now moves further. The other two talents have remained the same. Level 45 is our Brew tier, with Gift of the Mist mixed in, but basically deals with how you mitigate damage. Black Ox Brew is basically Chi Brew, Light Brewing is Ascendance, and Gift of the Mist allows you to spawn orbs more frequently. Just to note, Black Ox Brew is reduced just like Ironskin Brew, Fortifying Brew, and Purifying Brew when you use Keg Smash and Tiger Palm. This makes the effective cooldown much lower if you're fully active and will vary from player to player. At no haste, and if you play pretty much optimally, you're looking at about a 55-second cooldown. That goes lower with haste. Next up, level 60, which still has Leg Sweep. Ring of Peace has been reworked to be a knockback if enemies use an ability or spell inside. And then finally, Dave. Yes, our dear sweet Dave is now a talent. You may lament. I'll allow it this time. Next up, level 75. Largely the same, aside from Diffuse Magic and Dampen Harm have been toned down, and Healing Elixirs is now an active ability that will trigger automatically when you hit below 35%. Healing Elixirs is a lot stronger and fills that self-healing need as well, so keep that in mind when you look at these talents, but again, tailor them to encounter. Level 90 is largely the same, but Cheat Torpedo has been replaced with Special Delivery, which allows your Brew Chugging to have a chance to throw a keg at a random enemy and hit an area around them. Invoke Zhuen is now Invoke Neozao, just basically a reskin, same ability. It is worth noting that Russian Jade Wind is now free and is an option to fill in your rotation if you feel you have too much free time in your rotation, while also giving you some extra damage. If you run into some level trouble leveling, Neozao will probably solve this problem. It's also worth noting that Russian Jade Wind does solve the need to have an on-demand ability that grabs things at AoE, as if your Keg Smash is down, you don't really have much. Level 100 is several passives that improve your ability to tank and may augment how you play. High Tolerance is a flat stagger buff, but it also gives you an increase in haste based on your level of stagger, going from light, which is green, all the way up to red, which is heavy. It's 5% increments for each level. Blackout combo empowers several of your rotational abilities, as well as Iron Skin and Purifying Brew after using a Blackout Strike. And finally, Elusive Dance grants you dodge based on how much you purify, as well as increasing the amount of damage you actually purify. If you haven't noticed already, it's all passive, and none of them other than Blackout combo will have a massive impact on how you play. Briefly touching out Blackout combo, however, using Tiger Palm after Blackout Strike triples its damage. Breath of Fire gets its cooldown reduced by 6 seconds, which becomes more important with Hot Blooded as a trait. Keg Smash reduces cooldowns by an additional 2 seconds. Iron Skin Brew grants you 3 seconds of pause stagger, and Purifying Brew grants you an additional stack of Mastery's buff. Next up, I'll cover your important artifact traits that you'll get to see when you finally get your artifact on Legion's launch. Upon acquiring Fuzan, you'll gain Flaming Keg, which behaves a lot like Dizzying Haze, but it's on a minute and 15-second cooldown and causes the target to miss their melee swings for 3 seconds. It's also now going to hit like a freight train and is really great for just kind of clearing out a lot of quest mobs, so keep that in mind when you're questing. Hot Blooded increases the damage of Breath of Fire's dot, and more importantly, it reduces the damage you take by 2% per point while the dot is active. Facepalm gives a 10% chance per point for Tiger Palm to reduce brew cooldown by 1 additional second, and it also deals more damage per point when it procs. Potent Kick increases the duration of Iron Skin Brew by 0.5 seconds per point. Overflow gives you a chance to have a double strength gift to the Ox Orb, and it also kind of helps play into a jackpot sort of feeling that you'll get, which gets covered by your crit, which we'll get into later. It increases 5% additively per point. Dark Side of the Moon reduces the next melee swing done based on the amount of points you have in this trait. The amount is 2% per point, just so you know. Dragonfire Brew causes your Breath of Fire to now cause you to pulse AoE damage for 8 seconds after you cast it. Brew Stash gives you 10% more dodge for 1.5 seconds after consuming a brew. And finally, Fortification gives you 25% dodge for 21 seconds, basically makes you unkillable to physical damage. It's absolutely wonderful for that. The final trait I'm going to touch on is Obstinate Determination. I left this for last, as it's probably our most important artifact trait in the entire tree, and it's not even a gold trait. If you read the description, it reads very similar to how Desperate Measures worked in Warlords, but you don't need the Hellfire Citadel 2-piece, obviously, to make it awesome. There's a difference, though. There is actually no internal cooldown to it, so as long as you can consistently ping-pong from below 34% to above, you will continue to generate orbs, even if it is literally 31.00001% to 34.999999%. If you can keep going above 35 and below, you will continue to spawn orbs. In this instance, your healing is not limited by GCDs, nor is it limited by energy, which has the potential to do an incredible amount of self-healing. The biggest disadvantage is obviously this is harder to take advantage of in more difficult, hard-hitting content like Mythic Plus dungeons and Mythic raids. But as a bonus, or not bonus, depending how you see it, you'll probably give your healer a few heart attacks. This is not to say that the potential of the Brewmaster is limited to low health, but it's more to say that we have an emergency option if it gets really bad. Next up, stat changes. This will be relatively brief. I'm going to touch a bit more on haste than I will the other stats, but I will also touch on our mastery a bit. Versatility is still a versatility, though. Gives a flat damage increase, flat damage reduction, flat healing increase. A little bit more. It's a little bit under budget relative to other stats, but it does what it does. Our mastery is now Elusive Brawler rather than Stagger. Our new mastery gives you a % of dodge every time you fail to dodge based on your mastery until you dodge. So if you have 15% and you have 20% mastery, you get hit, and you now have 30%, you get hit again, you have 55%. This keeps going until you actually dodge a blow, and then you reset back down to 0. But that would be 15% of your dodge. There are breakpoints to the max amount of swings it can take, but the stat has value in between those breakpoints because it acts more like an average dodge. However, it is relatively consistent versus something like Elusive Brew, where I'm sure everyone's had those moments where they'll still take every single melee swing through it, even if that is a once-in-a-million chance. Next up is Crit, and this goes into an ability called Celestial Fortune, which gives you a chance equal to your crit to duplicate the heal for 65% of its value. This goes for self-healing and external healing. So what ends up happening is you can have a Gift of the Ox Orb that crit heals, that then has the Overflow crit heals, which doubles it again, and then again you have the Celestial Fortune proc, which increases that healing by 65%. You can get some pretty wicked orbs. Just keep in mind that these aren't going to happen that often. And then finally, we have haste. Haste has traditionally been a little more than a comfort stat for Brewmasters and hasn't actually been that great. However, in addition to the increased amount of energy that we get, because that is still the same, in Legion it gains an additional benefit by reducing the cooldown of some of our core abilities of the spec. It reduces the cooldowns of Keg Smash and our 2 brews, as well as Fortifying Brew. I take that back. I was lying. It doesn't, but it does indirectly through Keg Smash. Now, it is worth noting that Rushing Jade Wind also continues to benefit from haste, but all these put together with a high haste build can actually have you have a very high action per minute rotation, but Rushing Jade Wind also becomes more difficult to fit in. Keep that in mind when you're talenting. In more difficult content, this will likely be one of our go-to stats, as having higher coverage of Ironskin Brew and being able to purify more liberally is always a great thing. But I personally will recommend about 20 to 30% haste roughly before you kind of start investing other stats. But if you're more interested in exact optimal numbers, entirely recommend simming your character out. And that's kind of becomes a more advanced thing. Generally, whatever you get is probably fine for the content you're doing. But if you really want to min-max, go sim it. I don't know what your character needs. Finally, to tie it all together, though, I'm going to just do a quick little short version for if somehow you manage to skip to this point in the video. Offensively, energy play stays the same. You use Tiger Palm to bleed off excess energy and somewhat as a filler, but always leave enough for Keg Smash. Fill in empty globals with Blackout Strike, Breath of Fire, and any of the talents you may have taken to fit into your rotation. Defensive, Ironskin Brew is your safety net, while Purifying Brew cleans up the mess it leaves afterwards. Don't be afraid to game obstinate determination to survive tight moments like you would with Desperate Measures. If you're using Gift of a Mist, don't be afraid to float between 45 and 70% health to get more value from the talent while trying to stay out of Panicking Healer range. Yes, Panicking Healers are okay. Don't piss them off too much, though. Talents allow you some measure of customization on how active the spec feels and plays. You're going to want to ignore your golden traits for a while, though. None of them are really worth a lot, and you'll have to skip a lot of other really strong traits if you want to go for them immediately. You will want to prioritize grabbing Obstinate Determination because it is the Desperate Measures of Legion and can be a lifesaver. Do keep in mind that the best way to do it, if you really want to optimize your artifact points, is you'll actually want to go around and dodge Gifted Student and grab it, and you'll get it before you hit 110, and artifact power starts to kind of exponentially increase in how much you need to get to the next level. Haste is a much better stat in Legion and can help you feel more active if that's a concern of yours. It also does a much better job of speeding up your rotation and increasing brew usage. Mastery is a stacking dodge buff, and if you fail to dodge and crit causes heals, to do increased healings, whether it's from yourself or others. All in all, the spec has changed from what it used to be, with several abilities going away for the spec or being moved into the talent tree. While initially worried, I think the spec will be alright unless the playstyle of it doesn't jive with you, the player, but I do encourage everyone who plays Brewmaster to at least give it a fair shot when they're able to, instead of outright dismissing the spec. I'd say about 2 levels or so. If it really doesn't feel that good, that's fine, but give it a few levels. It'll grow on you. It's grown on a lot of people, I know, but there are some who don't. If not, recommend Demon Hunter. Hear they're a lot like old Brewmaster, but please, try this first. After leveling it to 110 personally, it feels a lot better than I thought, and it'll probably get better with more gear as more time. As I get more haste, it feels a lot faster, and like I said earlier, I'm having trouble squeezing Russian Jade Wind in. It's not for lack of dead time. You can create it however if you like, which is really strong in my opinion. But yeah, filling in globals with more than Tiger Palm does have its own charm, and I know some people will probably enjoy that a lot more than mashing in my instance, the 2 key a lot. And while I would personally prefer it to be more self-sustaining without flirting so closely with death, I do understand the reason the spec is aimed to do so, even with the potential issues looming. Hopefully this has helped you in transitioning from Warlords of Draenor to Legion, and I hope to see you drunk on the turtle soon.